What is the oldest movie in the history of the world? Well, that probably depends on how you define a movie. Because what even is a movie anyways? Is a movie a complex multimedia narrative-driven experience, an omnivorous mode of art that consumes and subsumes music, photography, painting, architecture, and theater? Or is a movie just exactly that, a moving image and nothing more? The idea of the movie as we know it seems to spring out of our heads fully formed at some nebulous point in the past because its evolution into a distinct artistic discipline occurred fitfully and convergently. Countless pioneers and practitioners of the arts all simultaneously seem to be gesturing at the same idea of the moving image while approaching its development from radically different angles. Movies can mean so many things to so many different people. Movies can be so many different things. So what is a movie, this magical, amorphous thing? And where does it come from? Where does it begin? Perhaps it's easiest for us if we work our way backwards by starting with a definition. Here is a new art. So begins the postscript of American philosopher Susanne Langer's treatise Feeling and Form, A Theory of Art, entitled Notes on the Film. Published in 1953 by America's first female philosopher, Langer was performing a fundamentally novel act of philosophy in trying to understand the aesthetic significance and functioning of the motion picture as one of the arts. Movies were still so new, relatively speaking, that Langer refers to movies as the film, since the formal terminology of the discipline had yet to be officially settled upon. Even still, in 1953, there were decades of technological innovation and artistic experimentation that separated movies from their nascency, and it was only at this point in time that Langer deemed them aesthetically distinct enough to be a new art. However, Langer did not see film as a direct evolution of the dramatic mode of theater. Rather, she holds that the moving camera and the development of motion picture montage, or editing, divorced the screen from the stage. Film, to her, is something else, an omnivorous mode of art that swallows all its influences and makes of them something new. Where a stage play is a dramatic mode of art, film is a narrative mode due to the unique perspective its viewer assumes. On Langer's account, movies are the medium of dream. The quintessential character of a dream, of course, is that no matter how hazy, unusual, or foreign our surroundings, the dreamer is always at the center of it, a subconscious mind occupying an apparitional perspective not entirely of their self, through which they can glide ghost-like through a foreign narrative. And this, too, could be described as the character of a movie. Quoting Langer, the dreamer is always there. Things may occur around her or unroll before her eyes, she may act or want to act or suffer or contemplate, but the immediacy of everything in a dream is the same for her. Here, Langer sees the camera as the mind's eye within this dream, the disembodied apparitional perspective the viewer of a film assumes when engaged in the act of viewing. The soundtrack, then, is its accompaniment, a sort of mind's ear, a part of the dream, bringing to mind that famous quote attributed to Peter Jackson on the set of The Lord of the Rings. When asked where the lighting came from in a certain scene, or criticized on the grounds of realism, he always responded that lighting came from the same place as the music. To Langer, film need not faithfully and exactly replicate reality. This impulse is a kind of artistic perversion that prevents the medium of film from realizing its dreamlike quality is exactly what makes it so powerful. Film, as dream, has license to be realer than reality. Langer's definition is great, and I love it. It certainly resonates with the things that I personally like the most about the cinematic medium. Longtime friends of the channel may remember my last cinematic breakdown on Wes Anderson's 2023 magnum opus Asteroid City, a movie I consider to be a direct descendant of this Langerian tradition. Here, Wes plays gleefully with our preconceived boundaries between stage and screen, creating a uniquely stylized world that, despite taking place inside of a play, seems more truthful to life than the monochrome segments shot outside of the film's framing device. Asteroid City's entire falling arc takes place within an extended dream sequence, blurring the lines between movie and reality and leaving us awash to grapple with its unwieldy, ponderous, thematically integral metaphors. So, Langer certainly seems to encapsulate all the things we take for granted about most movies today. It gestures at the quintessential elements of film as we understand them. But that's not to say her view is perfect. What about animation, for instance? This is already a hotly contested topic in film analysis, and one that Langer devotes little of her analysis to. Perhaps that's unfair to her, though, since Notes on the Film is merely a postscript appended to a much larger artistic philosophy, and animation in her day was an art almost exclusively associated with Walt Disney in the West at that time, despite its development abroad. But even today, the animation question still hasn't been entirely settled. Preeminent modern auteurs like Guillermo del Toro have tried to champion animation as a distinct art form under the movie umbrella, not merely a genre of film or a novelty to be consumed by children. Perhaps this is a useful caveat to Langer's definition, then. The label of movie is a type of art, and animation and film are both different tokens of that type, albeit tokens with disciplinary differences. They are each their own individual art forms, but they exist under a broader artistic tradition of movie making. If anything, stop motion and animation have the capacity to prove Langer's maxim about the unreality of film becoming its defining trait. Animation may be the most faithful, primordial mode of movie-making expression there is. When movement can be squashed and stretched, the dimensions of reality itself can be fudged to create a sequence more arresting and evocative than anything real. But for another thing, Langer doesn't quite know what to make of documentaries either, calling them a pregnant invention in her analysis that she quickly brushes past. The underlying motivation for this seems to be a deep uncertainty. She cannot tell if documentaries are just a type of film or if documentary is a separate discipline under the broader umbrella of the moving image, just like animation. It's easy to see why, as documentary seems to contain its own codes of practice and stylistic constraints that make it harder for the viewer to assume the camera's perspective as they would under the ordinary Langerian tradition. Documentary films that blur this line, though, make it easier to interrogate documentary itself as a different type of movie, rather than just another genre of film. Take, for instance, non-narrative documentaries, where, absent any dialogue, footage can be silently and solemnly intercut, using the art of the edit to imply symbolism and parallels between each individual shot. Documentaries that do feature a narrator, however, are not without their own fascinating artistic ramifications. The narrator, a kind of faux storyteller, is implied to be the perspective and guiding hand behind the assemblage of a documentary film, themselves imbued with inadvertent authority, even though they are merely a retroactive addition meant to impose order and perspective upon the perspectiveless. Sans these murky objections, though, Langer's definition appears to be mostly sound, and that's why we'll be operating under it. What we need, though, is a better test case, a movie that perfectly exemplifies the conventions by which the medium of the movie is bound. And 1 year after the publication of Feeling and Form, such a film would be released, a film that serves as proof positive of all of Langer's best arguments. Alfred Hitchcock's 1954 masterpiece Rear Window is perhaps the easiest murder mystery to solve in cinematic history. There's only one suspect, and our protagonist identifies him right away. But the point of Rear Window is not to be treated as a conventional case of criminal intrigue. Instead, the point of Rear Window is simply to watch Rear Window, because this is a movie about what it means to watch. In that regard, it was practically made for Langer's philosophy of film. The entirety of the movie takes place within the four walls of a single apartment, as a currently immobilized and wheelchair-bound photojournalist named L.B. Jeffries pruriently peers out into the outside world from the comfort of his own home. I love everything about how this movie looks. The matte painting skies, the soundstage feel to the buildings, the diegetic soundtrack and gentle hum of big city clamor and cacophony floating gently over the rooftops. Rear Window revels in the unreality, the fantastical and heightened nature of all these things in film. It is the perfect example of Langer's contention about film as the medium of dream. Both for ourselves and L.B. Jeffries, the titular Rear Window is our only vantage point into the outside world, the comfortable place from which our view of the reality of the film before us is stationed. We see it first from wide, a view of the apartment complex in all its glorious backlot style, a reality more truthful than anything real, a photograph within a photograph. You start with the view from far away, apartment windows as little vignettes, glimpses into the life of others, a frame within a frame, a picture within the picture, the motion picture. The first transgression of the sanctity of the form comes when Jeff pulls out the binoculars and the picture pushes further inwards. We are now invading uncharted territory, past the veil of that level of nosiness and human curiosity that is frowned upon but secretly indulged in by all. The equipping of his telephoto camera lens is the next major departure from the typical norms of decency that govern our private voyeuristic pursuits. Using Jeff's professional equipment, we can see even closer into the apartment complex now, closer than we should be able to, as the man operating it now controls the frame for us. He can now peer further into the vignette of his neighbors' lives than before, define the scope of the image as he sees fit to construct the narrative around it. But now, every time we return to the view of the rear window as it once was, the view of that backyard vignette, without the aid of the camera within camera, without that magnifying lens, we feel uneasy, as if there is danger lurking in the darkness now that we are no longer able to see all the way in. Our murder suspect sits in the inky black darkness of his apartment. Only the glowing red bud of his cigarette is visible. He lays motionless, and yet we are afraid. The opening of the Overton window comes with a caveat. To perceive is to be perceived. And then, in one of the most cosmically and metatextually terrifying moments ever put to film, a cardinal sin of film is committed. The sanctity of the camera is defiled. And suddenly we remember we are not an objective observer. We have never been an objective observer. Through the rear window, we have been seen. Rear Window, it could be argued, is an excellent example of the moment when the movies began to take a shape most familiar to us now. Even today, its tightly dialed tension is utterly thrilling to watch, but obviously it is not the absolute earliest movie in the history of the world, just the earliest movie from the period of modernity that still suits our contemporary palate. However, Langer's definition of film does provide us with some additional utility in terms of our timeline. The point at which film began developing a unique artistic identity was the point at which it ceased to be seen as a lower art by the upper class. Previously relegated to a sideshow attraction, then as a means of mass media news dissemination, film was ridiculed as lowbrow and vulgar. Its omnivorous tendencies yet to be appreciated for the uniqueness at the time of its inception, movies were merely seen as an inferior offspring of the theatrical arts. Langer opines on when film truly found its footing as a distinct movement, writing that movies and their, quote, artistic potentialities became evident only when the moving camera was introduced. The moving camera divorced the screen from the stage. So maybe the moment film became metatextually self-aware of its own emerging artistic identity is the moment the movies as we know them really began. And in terms of movies about movies, film doing philosophy on itself, Buster Keaton's 1924 feature film Sherlock Jr. is perhaps the finest example there is. During the movie, while working his day job at the local cinema, Keaton falls asleep with his head leaning against the projector, and as his corporeal form separates from his cognition, the movie projector begins projecting his own subconsciousness out onto the theater screen. In seeing the characters of his own life superimposed onto the characters of a film within a film, Keaton seems to be suggesting something about the character of the mind's interaction with the motion picture. Our philosophical and intellectual curiosity is relentless, and so we attempt to impress ourselves upon the film. Our perception solidifies the dream within our minds to the point where it becomes tangible. Desperate to understand the confusing and disorienting logic of the dream, Keaton scrambles to find purchase to intellectually insert himself into the film, and he does so by literally running into the screen in front of him. He stumbles through scene after scene, the picture-within-picture match-cutting between iconic cinematic tropes of climactic danger. Keaton here is demonstrating the staggering breadth of film as an art form, indicating through his philosophy everything that he believes it has the potential to be at its very best. Buster Keaton was a silent era star who would risk life and limb with each and every last one of his stunts, leaping off buildings or getting buried beneath them. He believed film contained these loftier artistic and philosophical potentialities, yes, but he was also a blockbuster movie maker who saw stunts and magic tricks and good old-fashioned stage illusions as a pivotal part of his medium, of his art. Even now, a full century later, this stunt from Sherlock Jr. still makes audiences gasp and wonder how it was done. Film was both a mode of mass entertainment and personal artistic expression. Without Buster Keaton, there's no Jackie Chan, no Tom Cruise, there's no Mission Impossible or Police Story. These guys were directly inspired by the old master, and they say so themselves. Keaton himself, however, did not emerge out of nothing. He too was inspired by another artist of the motion picture form, another magician of the silver screen, inspired by a man named Georges Méliès, who in 1902 would release one of the most influential and famous works of proto-cinema in human history. Even if you've never heard of Méliès before, you've almost certainly seen this. So much of what this art would become is here. The moving camera is what truly separated the stage from the screen, transformed cinema into a distinct art, and though our frame throughout A Trip to the Moon is mostly static and stage-like, we get our very first glimpse of the promise and potential of the movies with that false zoom inwards towards the moon. It must have been absolutely mind-blowing to see the camera moving at the dawn of the 20th century. Hell, it's still mind-blowing here in the 21st. That moment when we assume the perspective of the rocket gliding gracefully through the stars as we approach that strange and foreign world long lofty and out of reach still gives you goosebumps. This is the kind of movie magic moment that transcends centuries, the kind of thing that instantly makes itself clear and shows to you with the startling chill of clarity just how integral it is to the form and everything that comes after it. Méliès is engaged in so much experimentation with stylization and stagecraft, forced perspective, special effects, miniatures and mats, and everything that makes movies great. 67 years later, we would fire real men in a metal bullet into the stars. For it to be possible, it first had to be conceivable, and a trip to the moon was one of the very first to indicate what cinema could be, not merely a means of capturing reality, but of manifesting dream and making it material. But with Méliès, however, we have already arrived at the end of the utility and leeway Langer's definition of film offers us. Méliès' productions engage in stagecraft, montage, and special effects, but by this time cameras were too bulky to offer much in the way of mobility. And as we regress further and further back in time, the limited technical capacity of the medium becomes its biggest hindrance. The Lumiere brothers' arrival of a train at La Ciotat in 1895 became famous as the first film exhibited at a showing, marking the birth of the cinema as we know it. But what about after this, or rather before? We are now firmly in the realm of proto-cinema, the attempt to capture the moving image before the medium which principally enabled its possibility. Even earlier than the film reel, the continuous feed of frames through the projector, mankind was still attempting to use photography to capture motion. Edward Muybridge's The Horse in Motion in 1878 is perhaps the most famous example of this phenomenon. Despite originally being displayed in the form of a cabinet card series, today we often see it played in animation, one frame fed into the next, as if this was Muybridge's true intention all along. But if a movie is just the abbreviation from which it descends, if it is merely that art which moves, then the movie must predate even celluloid itself. The zoetrope predates the camera. Shadow puppetry predates the zoetrope. How long have we been in pursuit of the movie? Film, animation, documentary, these all have concrete boundaries. They are some of the youngest art forms in the world. We can see where each of these arts began and ended, trace their evolutionary line. But if movies collectively, en masse, are defined as just the moving image, the evolutionary genus from which these differing species descend, what then? How do we define the origins of the movie if it can predate its most famous mechanism of delivery? At every twist and turn, it feels as if these ideas about what film is, does, and should be emerge from the ether of our consciousness, fully formed, as if we have always had the idea of the movie. So where did movies come from? What is the oldest movie in the history of the world? "36,500 years ago, a group of early humans journeying through a stony riverside gorge in present-day France ducked into a deep, gouging crevasse in the side of a nearby cliff face for shelter. Fumbling in the dark, their only illumination fragile, flickering torches, they journeyed deeper and deeper into the mountainhead until the light from the entrance had been completely consumed, and the only thing before them was a vast, blank, dark face of rock. And then, for reasons we will never understand, they began to paint. Centuries passed. The changing of the landscape covered the cave's original entrance, burying this prehistoric gallery safely in a tomb of silent stone. In 1994, it was discovered by a trio of French spelunkers who immediately realized the incredible value of the thing they had just uncovered. Public access to the cave they came to call Chauvet was restricted immediately and indefinitely. To this day, none may enter. In 2010, famed German documentary filmmaker Werner Herzog and a meager crew were the first human beings permitted to enter Chauvet for the purpose of photography. The resulting film of their exploits was christened Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Herzog and company were only allowed to access the cave for 6 shooting days split across the cave's exceedingly brief open season and under exceptionally strict requirements about the kind of equipment they could take inside. The precious little time they did have was curtailed further by a near-lethal level of carbon dioxide wafting through its chambers, limiting filming to just a few hours each day. Chauvet did not want to relinquish her secrets to us easily. She wanted it to stay buried, but we persisted. Periodically, throughout the duration of the documentary, Herzog and his crew leave Chauvet and roam restlessly throughout the world, visiting museum collections of artistic artifacts from that same time period, or sites where Aboriginal people still practice traditional cave art to this day. We are told a story by an anthropologist in one such community who witnessed his guide dropping down to his knees in the middle of a tour to help repaint a damaged drawing. When asked why he was painting, the guide replied he was not. It was the spirits that were moving him. Maintaining these works of art becomes a tradition as each new artist is guided by the ghostly hands of the old. But with each new vignette, a pattern emerges in the film. Herzog's trips outside the cave show us that early humans were storytellers and creatives. Their so-called crude bone flutes could already play the full range of the pentatonic scale. Their figurative depictions still resonate with our culture's beauty standards to this day. And after each trip, he and his team always returned to the Cave of Forgotten Dreams, unable to resist its allure. I'll just say it bluntly, because Herzog leaves the main argument of his film beautifully implicit. Werner Herzog thinks Chauvet Cave is the world's first movie theater. Throughout the film, there is a running motif that the cave can either accept or reject those who behold it. At first, we are rejected by the cave. We refuse to believe it could be everything Herzog says it is. How could this possibly be a movie? But it is. The walls of Chauvet Cave are lined with paintings of impossibly precise detail, displaying techniques of delicate design and geometric perspective anomalous even amongst other cave art sites of its kind. We see rhinoceroses with 7 horns, antelopes with 8 feet, almost as if these prehistoric artists were trying to capture their subjects in motion, in 3 dimensions, as they were in life. And when illuminated by flickering firelight, when narrated by an elder of the community, when accompanied by the whistling of the flute, when observed in the context of ritual and shrouded in ceremonial performance, in the dancing of the shadows, in the flickering of the firelight, the paintings of Chauvet Cave would have almost moved. Herzog undersells the monumental significance of the cave. No matter how many times I watch the final few minutes of Cave of Forgotten Dreams where he stops narrating his own documentary and lets Chauvet speak for herself are a magic trick. Herzog deliberately hides the cave's final, most beautiful room, the Room of the Lions, from the viewer until the very end, and in the context of every interview and insight offered to you before, lets you, the viewer, come to conclusions entirely on your own. This is the only time in the film where the presence of his film crew within the cramped cavern completely disappears. 3 lions in particular always stood out to me, and still do to this day. The first, in isolation, is a completely novel angle. It faces away from us, head at the side, ears twitching, the wall rejecting us. The second and third are conjoined, overlapping on top of each other, one head tilting down and the other tilting up, layered like the frames of a motion picture, separated by a mere blink of the human eye. If the flickering flames of torchlight cast just the right shadow over the cavern wall, or if you close and open one eye at a time, you can almost imagine it. Movement, the lion bobbing its head up and down. The same is true of the multi-horned rhinos shrouded in simulated motion blur, legs overlapping, a desperate attempt to capture something moving and real and tangible and alive. This is animation. We were animators before we were hunters or gatherers or farmers or emperors or slaves or kings or stockbrokers. We were animators. Film is truth at 24 frames per second. We have always known this before we even had celluloid or cameras or movies. We were born like this, fully formed. We were born to create. We were born for and of art, and we willed ourselves into being. The same impulses, the same fears, the same lusts and loves, the same us was always there, scratching and clawing to break free. And yet, perhaps this limitation of medium was a worthy sacrifice, for our ancestors knew liberation of a different kind. Liberation from structure and order and time, and the prison of history. Their world was fluid and permeable. Things could be other things. Things could transform, be reborn, live and die and live again. Nothing was set in stone. Nothing was real. Nothing was certain. Not their identities, nor bodies, nor self-conceptions, nor spirits. Not even the paintings on the wall were set in stone, for the hands of spirits guided them time and time again to the well of humanity, to bring forth the artist in their souls, to draw water from the stone. They were painting over the same stories and lines that had existed for as long as they knew, for they had no history, no authors, no artists. They simply were. They were allowed to be. Maybe a man's name means very little. For as hard as we children of modernity strive to see the wall, for as desperately as we want it to accept us, some part of it will always remain elusive and enigmatic. For me, it's the woman and the bison on the rock pendant. For try though I might, I struggle to make out the forms contained therein. Something was lost to us in that time, Herzog muses. Something we can never get back. And yet, despite how fascinating I found Chauvet and Cave of Forgotten Dreams upon first viewing, I am still understating just how important this is, because the full weight of what it represents within the history of our species did not truly strike me until I watched this 20-second long animation by Etienne Jules Marais from 1885. I'm just gonna play it for you. Do you see it? Do you see it? I hope you do. I really hope you do. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. If this is our first attempt at animation in the medium of film, then this is our first attempt at animation, period. Chauvet Cave is the world's first cinema. The way the pictures on the walls blend into one another, overlap, superimposed through states of motion, the technique is exactly the same. Our primitive ancestors yearned for the moving image. They wanted it as badly as we do now. They wanted to capture their reality, preserve it, live it, inhabit the mode of dream. They sought truth in 24 frames per second, exactly the same way we do, in a time when the great magic trick of capturing time was so painfully out of reach for them. And their direct descendants, the people of that same French soil, Méliès and Marais and the brothers Lumière, achieved it for them. This 20-second reel of wiggly little lines and this bullet in the eye of the moon and these pictures of a black man riding a horse make me weep like a fucking baby, because in these moments, humanity achieved its oldest and most desperate dream. The movie is the lowest of the arts, yet it is the product of every artistic discipline ever conceived. It has the lowest barrier of entry, it is the most facile to passively consume, yet the most difficult to digest philosophically. And yet all of us seem to have an instinctive sense about the movies, a sense that shows us something about even the films we do not understand that resonates viscerally, emotionally, and evocatively. In light of everything, it's easy to see why. This has always been in us. It will never not be in us. If you dragged one of our earliest sisters out of Chauvet Cave and into the light, if you sat her before the silver screen of a theater and showed her a movie, she would weep. Not for lack of understanding, not because she cannot comprehend, but because she could. Because she already does. Because deep down inside of us we have always understood. The whole of human history has been directed at this singular aim. We beautiful people, frightened of the dark, have been desperate to capture the light and use it to preserve life for all of time. A movie is a spiritual experience. A movie is a means of cheating death. A movie is a gateway into eternity, into the great beyond. Ever since our fragile little species began, we have been creating. We have always been artists, and we have always been trying to make movies. At the front of Chauvet Cave is one of the only human depictions in the entire prehistoric gallery, a rusty reddish handprint with a broken pinky, the signature of an artist. Many of the cave's paintings were attributed to them. Whoever this was, whoever they were in life, in death they are humanity's first auteur. They are the first filmmaker in the history of the world. Each and every one of us owes our lives to them today, because the dream that began 36,000 years ago is still being dreamed today. To quote Susanne Langer, daughter of this first filmmaker, mother of our species, the art goes on. It swallows everything. The dream mode is an endless now. I'm Frostbyte Freeman. And until next time, stay frosty.